Hey, good morning, eighth graders. We're going to move on with the other document on the Civil War. Civil War troops and war deaths, 1861 to 1865. So get out your packet. Stop this video if you haven't answered these questions first, because it doesn't do you any good just to listen to me answer the questions for you. So, try to work with us here. So if you haven't done these three questions, turn off the video and do them, and then we'll go over your answers. But if you have, then continue listening here. So the Civil War troops and war deaths 1861 to 1865. Remember, we started the year talking about the Civil War. The Civil War being that most tragic kind of war because Americans were fighting Americans. Brothers are fighting brothers, fathers are fighting sons. All the people who died in this war were American. And in fact, more Americans died in the Civil War than most other wars in American history combined. And this chart will demonstrate or show you that. So let's take a look at the chart. This shaded area right here, these two bars right here, are total number of troops who served in the war. So for the Union, you had a total of 2 million troops who served, and then for the Confederacy, you had a little bit, about, 750 maybe, 750,000, so less than a million, meaning the North had many more troops who served in the war. Now, battlefield deaths is the darkest shaded area here. And then deaths from disease and infections are the lines here, the diagonal lines. So when you talk about total deaths, it's both of those combined. Right there, and both of these combined here. Which, if you're really thinking, yeah, more people died from death and disease, more soldiers died from death and from disease and infections than actually died on the battlefield, even though we had some really bloody battles during the Civil War. Most of the deaths, total number of deaths, actually don't come from the battlefield, actually come from disease and infections and, dying after battles or even before battles. So let's answer the first question here based on the information in this graph. State one advantage the Union had over the Confederacy during the war. Excuse me. No, sorry. So we talk about advantages here. I mean, look at the number of troops. The Union had over 2 million troops here, where the Confederacy only had 750,000. So you could say that, pretty simple, that the Union had more troops, that the Union had more than 1 million more troops. The South had fewer troops. Anything like that would be a correct answer. Approximately how many Confederate troops died during the Civil War? Now you look at these numbers. We're looking at the Confederacy right here. So we're looking for the total number who died. So it's this right here. We take that line straight across. And you could have said anywhere from 200 to 300,000 troops died during the Civil War. And that would be a correct answer. And then finally, state one reason deaths from disease and infections were greater than battlefield deaths during the Civil War. Well, we talked about that. We talked about the medicine that they had at this time. We talked about how their knowledge of infections was very limited. They did not understand bacteria. They did not understand how infections were caused. They actually did not understand how to treat infections. So often, if you got an infection, let's say if an infection in your leg and an infection in your arm, their solution, because they didn't have antibiotics, their solution was actually to, in most cases, cut it off, right? To remove that infected limb, that infected leg, that infected finger, that infected arm, whatever it might be. So amputations was very common during the Civil War. And even after that, often that would cause even more infection. So infection caused a great deal of people to die. So if you wanted to write that for state one reason deaths from disease and infections are greater in the battlefield during the Civil War, you could say that they did not have any knowledge of what caused infections. Or be more general, say Poor medical treatment. There weren't a lot of doctors and nurses. Often these hospitals where they treated patients on the battlefield were in barns, right? In these very unsanitary conditions that led to even more infection and even more death from that infection and disease and whatnot. They didn't have good food. They had spoiled food, unsanitary conditions. They lacked ways to deal with infection. We take it even further. There were very harsh conditions in military prisons where these prisoners of war were treated very, very horrifically. You had overcrowded encampments, meaning where these soldiers congregated in between battles. They were crowded into these, damp huts sleeping on the frozen ground, which led to even more disease and sickness that killed in massive numbers. So to wrap things up with the Civil War here, the Civil War, you added these two numbers together, 300,000 plus, close to 600,000. We're talking about, let's say, 250 plus 350. Over 600,000 Americans died in the Civil War. In comparison, the worst war, second worst war in American history would be the World War II, which we just finished. Over 400,000 Americans die in that war. So more than 200,000 Americans died in the Civil War than in World War II. World War II being the world's worst war as far as casualty count goes. So the Civil War was brutal. It tore the nation apart. It created scars and divisions that will last for a very long time. Slavery, it does come to an end. Abraham Lincoln freeing the slaves, becoming a Union war goal, eventually leads to the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, the 14th Amendment, which granted them citizenship, the 15th Amendment, which gave them the right to vote, all those things happening right after the Civil War. It'll also lead to the death of Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln's assassinated less than 2 weeks after the war comes to an end. And as far as bringing this country back together, it's going to be a very difficult road as we work together once again and try to repair the damage done by this Civil War. The freeing of the slaves will create divisions in the South, lead to segregation and more rampant racism in the South as we work through, the 20th century, the 1900s, where we're at now. Now that World War II is over, we'll start talking about the Civil Rights Movement, where blacks will start to fight once again for equality, a struggle that is not going to be won easily, and one that still has its, there's still gaps today when it comes to the equality that's been sought for minority groups, for African Americans, for as long as the war came to an end. So it was nice talking to you guys today. I will talk to you again soon. Remember, send messages, shout out here and there. Stay connected with your friends. Stay connected with your classmates, and we'll keep these videos coming. Take it easy.